on display and in enhancing their vulnerability to other forms of abuse. And we know that to be true because as we see pictures of Western imperialism when they go and invade countries or back other military operations to do that on their behalf, what is one of the common images of what we see of the oppressed? They're often stripped naked, humiliated publicly, and those pictures are circulated and put in history books the world over. And that is part of the spectacle of lynching. When we saw the ooh, had a cough. When we saw the pictures of like coming out of Guantanamo and the people being tortured there, one of the common images is we saw is them stripped naked, and the sexual violation and the humiliation and the spectacle of their ongoing torture was a part of war. So we know that people, captives held by the state, are subjected to this daily, and it's hidden behind bureaucracy. Oh, this is necessary. This is protocol. This must happen because of contraband and other justifications. When we see it for what it is, again, when we don't rely on the state to define itself, we define the state and what it's doing to us. We see that we are in an ongoing war, an ongoing genocide, and that the people held captive by the state in the prison industrial complex are being held in concentration camps and being tortured as captives of war. He does such a good job writing this, man. Survivors of the Branch Queens and Kew Gardens rebellions disclosed the sexualized nature of their dehumanization. They herded us like animals and forced us to lie on top of each other while guards made cruel and racist remarks like, "Put that dick in him, nigger." Prisoners who refused to lie on top of the other men were beaten mercilessly, reported Black Panther Party veteran Albert Woodfox. Several men were commanded to bend over and spread their buttocks only to be prodded and kicked in the rear. Others were told to try fucking each other. "I want your dick and hit this man's ass in front of you," or promise that if they could maintain an erection, they would be spared further beatings. Through these inflictions of sexualized torture, objectification, and violent homoeroticism, the guards sought to expel their captives from the domain of masculine humanity while reasserting themselves as dominant white men. Similar rituals were performed in prisons where no major rebellions occurred. Panther Ricardo de Leon reported that 2 days after the state siege of Attica, DOCS executed a series of anti-radical raids against politicized prisoners in Clinton. Captives maintained that prison guards and some of the same state troopers responsible for the bloodshed in D-Yard wantonly subjected them to gassings, macings, beatings, strip searches, and rectal examinations and other forms of sexualized humiliation. So I'm going to pause real quick because I'm going to start reading letters from not only Qasim Giroux, but other people that I write to who are held captive by the state. That's men, women, trans men, and people across genders and across the sexual spectrum, and as well as children. And when they describe the torture that they go to on a daily basis, like I said, the way in which we've been indoctrinated and that fighting spirit damn nearly quelled as far as on a mass scale, because there's no way we should allow over 2 million people held captive by the state to go through this daily torture every day. We need to burn the prisons down, I'm trying to tell y'all. I lost my place. But yeah, I'll start reading letters from them here in Spaces soon. One of the victims, I just have to make sure to get their permission to share on a recorded space. So once I get their permission, you'll hear from them themselves that this is their this is their reality. One of the victims described how a dozen or so guards set upon me and literally ripped the clothes from my body until I lay naked on the floor. He further explains that as they released their tensions on us through physical violence, they forced the prisoners to kiss their feet and call themselves niggers. Others were told to drop their hands and knees, bark like dogs, and pronounce themselves punks, in quotes. Prison sexual vernacular for men who are anally penetrated during homosexual sex. These practices were employed, in one captive's words, to strip the black man of his pride and to make it so that he conforms to the taste of his oppressors, a formulation that evokes an often undisclosed white fetish for the figurative and literal consumption of black flesh. A prisoner's rights lawyer later told Congress that despite a virtual media blackout, men in Clinton endured a truly vicious amount of brutalization until at least April of 1972, revealing the temporality and geography of the massacre to be much broader than has been previously understood. This brutalization sought to actively produce new gender and racial formations. An Auburn and Attica survivor explained that while torturing their captives, guards were calling the people niggers, calling brothers white niggers, Spanish niggers, black niggers, everybody is a nigger, who had taken part in the rebellion. The capacious, I hope I pronounced that right, use of this phrase, coupled with inflictions against people of all hues, illuminated the fundamental anti-blackness of the carceral state formation at the same time that it shows how this violence aimed to reproduce a social order that had been radically destabilized. By classifying all who rebelled niggers, the assault force legitimized the exposure of phenotypically white bodies to the forms of debasement for which black people are automatically eligible. This violence was not only aimed at killing, controlling, or debasing niggers, but at producing them. That's mad interesting, and I'll make it quick because if we think about how he's explaining here, that because the white people that did take part in the revolt and upending the social order within the prison, well, guess what? Now y'all are black. Now we're gonna treat you the way we automatically treat black people. And when we think about that again, we should think about that in our current times because a lot of people do not want to grapple with what it looks like to be revolutionary or what it looks like to actually resist the system or what it looks like to go about dismantling white supremacy, especially as crackers. Old Fays do not want to wrestle with that, especially Old Fays on the left. They love to do that whole watered down, no war but the class war, erasing the role that race plays and white settler colonialism plays, because then they would have to grapple with, damn, if I really do side with revolution, if I really do side with liberating black people and being firmly against anti-blackness that is the foundation of all oppressive systems, shit, I could be possibly treated like them. I would have to give up a certain privilege. I can no longer be safe from that type of violence, that anti-black violence. And so crackers actually have a lot to lose in this system that we are seeking to destroy. But that those who choose to actively destroy the system, they would have to destroy whiteness. So that's why I always say one of the litmus tests in which you do when you're around comrades who are crackers is you have, if they're one of those who like don't want to talk about race, or even black leftists who don't like talking about race to appease whiteness and white people around them. Them motherfuckers ain't really ready for revolution. I'm gonna tell you right now. I'll keep reading. And perhaps most importantly, it sought to purify and reconstruct the transgressed borders of white men to restore it as a privileged category of social being, although one for which white skin alone was not insufficient. As a lynching party and gang rape, the Attica massacre unleashed the sexual charge that simmers just beneath the surface of carceral domination. A survivor recalled the frenzied state trooper running amid the denuded black forms, yelling, "Find the big niggers and get their nuts." Big Black, who was accused of castrating a guard, was captured, stripped of his clothing, and forced to lay spear-eagled on a picnic table while his assailants voraciously cursed him, spit on him, burned his body with cigarettes, and subjected him to Russian roulette. He remained on the table for hours, during which the guards repeatedly attacked his genitals and threatened to castrate him with their bladed weapons. Other victims were anally raped with a variety of foreign objects, including nigger sticks, gun barrels, a broken bottle, and a screwdriver. These rituals of sexual torture went on for days, even after it became known that neither Big Black nor anyone else had castrated a hostage. Books like this are so important because what it challenges me to do and reminds me to do is to look at my everyday interaction with state and agents of the state. So when we get pulled over and they tell us to step out the car and they pat us down, we have been so indoctrinated to believe that that's just routine procedure, that that's something necessary to keep us and them safe, to keep this a safe interaction, which we should view it as, and the way I view it is that is a violent, sexual, traumatizing, fucking tactic of the state to remind you of your place, to keep you in check, to keep you in constant state of terror. And so when we start looking at the ways in which we are terrorized by the state, that is not just these one big events, that it is an ongoing process of violent dehumanization, of sexual torture, of repression. Again, we would know what we need to do to stop it. And that really we have, when we look at it in that way, we really have nothing to lose but our chains, like Assata told us. Attica's official body count reflects but a fraction of the casualty, suffering, and loss the massacre produced, not only for those who experienced it directly, but also for their loved ones. Survivors suffered a range of sociological and psychological harms, including amputation, malnutrition, fractures, scarring, chronic pain, arthritis, loss of mobility, spinal disorder, hypertension, seizures, cold sweats, reoccurring nightmares, migraines, uncontrolled rage, fatigue, fevers, flashback, swelling, paranoia, hallucinations, speech impediments, insomnia, depression, dizziness, auditory and visual impairments, blackouts, bone disorders, nosebleeds, memory loss, numbness, difficulty around crowds, fear of raincoats, prisons, police, and helicopters, difficulty trusting others, survivors' guilt, suicide ideation, self mutilation, hostility towards symbols of authority, and hatred of police. Which it's why it is so important that disability politics is centered. You have to center the most marginalized. And that is also why, like, as we're going through the sexual torture that they endure, the dehumanization that they continue to endure, talking about people, within prison, as well as we as the people out here in our interactions with the state, that we have to remember that pointing these things out is why we have to root these things from within any organization, or any cadre, or any community in which we live in. Meaning, we cannot be agents of the state. So being homophobic, being transphobic, being a rapist, being a predator, someone who preys on children, on anybody, and those who are ableist, those who prey on the most marginalized, are acting just as these agents of the state act and repressing us. So those who engage in that, we have to see them as enemies of the people and agents of the state. They don't have to get a check to be an agent. It is their actions, it is their impact on us and our and basically, again, deputizing themselves to help repress us revolting against the state and liberating ourselves and each other. That's what comes to my mind when I read this. And how these lists of disabilities that these people had by going through that torture and shit. A lot of this is again what we go through here on the outside, just living in this fucking white settler colony, and that is killing us, and it's done on purpose. I'll get back to the reading. Several survivors of the massacre later died of drug overdoses, cirrhosis of the liver, and alcohol poisoning resulting from chemical dependencies developed after the massacre. Casper Baker Gary, who I discuss in detail below, was one of many whose lives were shortened by mundane acts of cruelty. In 1993, as his body slowly gave way to kidney failure, He confided to a friend that his illness emerged because Attica guards had incessantly kicked him in the back while he was trapped in solitary confinement. A massacre's genocidal violence produced what anthropologist Christian A. Smith calls sequelae, thus gendered, reverberating, deadly effects of state terror that infect the affective communities of the dead. Mary Pope, whose husband died of a drug overdose in 1987, revealed that after Attica, he could not bear to be touched by others. Lana Anderson testified that following the massacre, she watched her husband slowly slip away. Joanne Williams' husband became extremely impatient, aggressive, and fearful, and had difficulty holding jobs. Donna Northrup reported that her husband was never the same man after what he went through at Attica during the retaking. Charlene Miller testified that after Attica, her father pulled away from his family, began drinking heavily, and that a light went out in him that never returned. She testified that her dad told her that he felt like a veteran of war and that his manhood was taken away from him due to beatings he received in his growing area, which prevented him from performing sexually. George Budd Jr. testified that his brother, a survivor of Attica, committed suicide on the 3-year anniversary of the massacre. In February of 1995, David Galloway, another Attica survivor, hung himself. Nicholas Morales spoke of living death, testifying, "They killed me that day." Deputy Warden Feifel, who presided over much of this terror, never discovered that Bugs had done much more than survive during the rebellion. He never learned that during its chaotic opening moments, Bugs had improvised a makeshift bomb that leveled the prison chapel. Bugs told me that after passing his exit interview as he filed onto the bus bound for Comstock and saw the sneering white faces looming over William Brown's corpse staring back at him, he turned to take one last look at Attica Prison, capturing a mental image that still brings him a small measure of delight. The chapel was still on fire, and thick black smoke was still coming from the top. This is a week later, man. They hadn't been able to put the fire out. Might still be on fire up there as far as I know. 50 years later, you dig? That's the end of the quote from Bugs. Damn, that's like a bomb ass memory. So basically, he set that chapel afire, and it was using a makeshift bomb, and it was still on fire. And he could see like the charred smoke when he was turning around leaving. That's, yo, come on. A beautiful operation. That's the name of this section. During a recorded phone conversation held just hours after the massacre, Nelson Rockefeller intimidated to President Nixon that the assault was really a beautiful operation. The governor's description of this macabre spectacle of Black death and mutilation as beautiful, in quotes, suggests that its visualization was circulated and consumed within broader economies of white culture. Having analyzed the sexualized practices of the massacre as lynching, I now turn to the photographic and representational practices deployed to memorialize and commemorate its white supremacist aesthetic to broader audiences. That's so interesting because there is a book by Saidiya Hartman called Scenes of Subjection. And what I just read just brings that book to my mind. And there's a free PDF. If you go on the search on my page and type in free PDF, a list of PDFs that are available are there, and it should be there. If not, it's in the library. As the physical violence itself, let me read that again. Having analyzed the sexualized practices of the massacre as lynching, I now turn to the photographic and representational practices deployed to memorialize and communicate its white supremacist aesthetic to broader audiences. As with the physical violence itself, these visual practices were as much about dehumanizing and ungendering Black men as they were about producing white masculine selfhood. As Maurice O. Wallace explains, through popular photographic practices, Black men come to embody the inverse picture necessary for the positive self portrait of white identity. This violence of representation is exemplified by the cover image of the official report of the New York State Special Commission on Attica, published by Bantam Books on the 1 year anniversary of the massacre. It depicts what can aptly be described as a 20th century slave coffle. A lone state trooper, clad in a bright orange raincoat, helmet, pants, and boots, stands with his feet shoulder width apart, clutching a long nigger stick which hangs below his knees. He is surrounded by a sea of niggerized bodies, most but not all of which are brown. The bodies are arranged in what appears to be several columns, but which is in fact a single massive serpentine line that extends across Attica's A yard. The figures are standing upright, with their hands on top of their heads. They are completely nude, and their genitals and buttocks exposed. As a semiotic vehicle in the pre internment era, the cover of the book conveyed white masculine supremacy and black non being as a common sense, and did so, as common sense, and did so under the insidious guise of an objective white liberal humanism. Clearly shaped by the visual imagery of white supremacy in which white men exist over and above his quote unquote primitive wards. The tableau provided publics beyond the walls with a titillating glimpse of the spoils of domestic war. It invited them to identify not with the denuded, disgraced, and niggerized figures in the coffin, but with the generic stand in for legitimized white state power, authority, and domination. The uninformed man, the uniformed man with the big stick standing in the center of the frame. The massacre was under intense visual surveillance. The FBI, you know what? Real quick, because so there's a book by Dr. Gerald Horne called The Counter Revolution of 1886, Texas Counter Revolution. I'll get the book, and it's also available in the library. And there's a post about it, but basically, Dr. Gerald Horne did a book about the counter revolution in Texas, right? And in the first few chapters, he describes how there was constant guerrilla warfare going on with the indigenous as well as with the captured Africans within the state, and that how they were constantly fighting, ongoing, like crackers was hunting people down to capture them, and that they were getting plots of land as settlement for doing this to quote unquote civilize the land, and that was warfare. Anyways, when he talks about being in chains and lined up as captive by the state to be ushered into these camps, it reminds me of how Gerald Horne describes in which, and he actually reads letters from these crackers who were lining up captive Africans who were enslaved to line them up to bring them back to the plantation, to bring them back to the process of dehumanization, and to bring them back to the exploitation and the, death basically for a lot of them, but to bring them back to their designated class of just beast of burden. And when we make the parallels again, it reminds us that when a lot of things change, a lot of things stay the same, that the nature of this white patriarchal capitalist system is to enslave all of us and to keep us there. So if we want freedom, if we want to get freedom, it's going to come at, again, revolting. It's going to come at revolution. It's going to come at burning down the prisons. It's going to come at going toe to toe with the state. And that is the broader liberation struggle that is going on globally right now. I think it's really important, and I'm glad he wrote it in this way because he makes it almost undeniable to see prisoners as what they are, captives of the state. I'll keep going. Let's see. I'm trying to find my place. The massacre was under intense visual surveillance. The FBI reportedly obtained 583 black and white photographs, 464 35mm color slides, and 331 color photographs. and 6 videotapes captured during the massacre and its aftermath by the New York State Police, the Monroe County Sheriff's Office, and the Niagara Falls Police Department, among other agencies. Additionally, at least one member of the National Guard took it upon himself to photograph the event as a private citizen, quote unquote. He then sold some of his photos to the press. Existing discussions have heretofore focused on the degree to which the visual record, which was generously pruned, cropped, and otherwise edited before it was turned over, was useful for identifying assailants for criminal and civil litigation. Although critical, this focus on authorized use values obscures the covert ways in which visual representations of anti-Black violence circulate as ubiquitous technologies of white subject formation, as sources of covert enjoyment, and as a semiotic stabilizers of white civilization. Oh, shit. Said a whole word. I know I stumbled on that, but basically what he's saying is that let's relate it to today in our times, right? How when victims of people who get murdered by the state, when their body, or vigilantes who deputize themselves to murder Black people, that their mutilated bodies or their dead bodies is oftentimes just something you scroll. It's a trending topic. It gets shared. I mean, even like, you know, post like George Floyd. We see now that George Floyd picture is being AI'd onto video games by fucking crackers who, see that as a joke, but that is part of the spectacle. That's part of them taking part in the settler colonial project of the dehumanization project, and how it becomes entertainment, and how they consume, the torture and the dehumanization of Black people. Fucking vampires, for real though. I'll keep reading because he goes further into it. But yeah, Sadia Hartman's book, Scenes of Subjection, man, when she touches on this, he probably mentions it in this. I don't remember. Grab some water. Existing discussions have heretofore focused on the degree to which the visual record, which was generously pruned, cropped, and otherwise edited before it was turned over, was useful for identifying assailants for criminal and civil litigation. Although critical, this focus on the authorized use values obscures the covert ways in which visual representations of anti-Black violence circulate as ubiquitous technologies of white subject formation, as sources of covert enjoyment, and as symbiotic stabilizers of white civilization. Before initiating the slaughter, the documentarians were instructed to capture situations of opportunity. In other words, the men with cameras were afforded the same latitude and creative license as the men with guns. In his testimony before the McKay Commission, an Attica survivor named Francis J. Hune briefly discussed the use of photographic equipment. As the vanquished rebels were being abused, Hune witnessed a trooper yelling, "Get that redacted," and then fire his rifle from the catwalk down into the yard at an indiscernible target, which we can safely assume was a person. He then saw a photographer run toward the very spot in order to shoot with the camera that which had already been shot with the gun. For Hune, who was white and apparently unsympathetic toward the rebellion, the event was quote unquote scary but also reassuring to me because they had time to take pictures, that they didn't feel they had to be on the defense. So just so I can put in context what I just read. So this photographer said that he had no sympathies toward the people rebelling. So him taking pictures of a bullet-ridden body was not something so he can get the truth out there. No, it was part of him taking taking pictures so that it could be shared in a way like he describes. He said, "I felt safe because the pigs let me take pictures of this body, which showed me that they didn't see a real immediate danger from the captives. So that reassured me." So basically, oh my God, the way he writes this is so good. So my interpretation, right, is like, it's a certain comfort that crackers get when they see us dead, when they see us in like servitude. It reassures them that the empire is intact, that they're safe, that the police are protecting them. And the reporter who the quote we just read basically described that. So in taking a picture of a subdued quote unquote brute, basically someone who is a direct enemy to the state, someone who threatens their way of life, that picture serves as a comfort that everything's okay, and it's shared in that way. That's some sick shit, right? I'll keep reading. This photo served no tactical function. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I skipped the line. The massacre was a space time of luxury and indiscretion where a violent mob had occasion to experiment and indulge their delayed belongings. I'm sorry, their delayed longings. The photos served no tactical function, and yet Hune suspected that these acts were not entirely random, that they were partially choreographed. He recalled that civilian dressed people were positioned on the catwalks and that they seemed to be directing things a bit. The beautiful operation was a cinema of terror. Officially, state actors recorded the operation for quote unquote archival and quote unquote training purposes, a non explanation that says little about what they hoped to learn from the visual record and how they understood its value as an archive. Much of the available footage was captured by a New York State police sergeant. It is notable for its obscured and degraded quality as well as its incompleteness. Interestingly, the trooper narrates what he is recording, allowing viewers to experience the encoding of the dominant narrative as the actual events are unfolding. At one point, he points the camera at a tunnel and, using photo or proto genocidal language, remarks that captives were constantly scurrying between different sections of the prison like rats. Mm, 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 mm. Experimenting with different forms of visualization, Smith shoots some of his video through the scope mounted on his rifle. The rectile pans back and forth across the yard, putting viewers in the position of sharpshooters, a preview of what was to come. At another point, he zeroes in on a revolting black man, referring to him as, a revolting black man, referring to him as, quote unquote, the ugliest, blackest Negro gentleman I've ever seen in my life. At which point, laughter can be heard in the room, indicating what Sadia Hartman, oh, boom, yeah, makes sense. Sadia Hartman calls the complicated nexus of terror and enjoyment. Yo, and that this is how powerful language is and why people, it's a red flag when people, especially where I'm seeing in leftist circles, people say like, oh, y'all want everyone to be politically correct and say the right things. It's like, no, when someone speaks in genocidal language, they mean you harm. They're on the side of the state. So when people use ableist language, when people use homophobic language, people use anti-black language, that shows that they don't see your humanity. They don't respect it. And why would they free something they don't see as human? So that means they're not for my liberation. And they also see and how they relate and see us as, unhuman beings. It also comes with a system and a protocol of violence that this unhuman needs to be brought to heel. This non-human has no purpose, so we have to give them purpose, and their purpose is to work for us, to be exploited by us, to allow us to dehumanize them, to victimize them, to terrorize them. That is their purpose. Is why I get so fucking mad, and I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna keep reading. I get so mad when I see things on the timeline, like those fucking feel good videos where they'll show like a black nurse teaching a cracker how to walk or some shit. I get so mad at that, not because I don't feel I don't feel like people should be like, get medicine and shit. But it's because it's whose media platform it exists on and who purpose it serves on that platform. This is the same platform where black people can get called all kind of niggers left and right by fucking white supremacists. White supremacists hold whole ass spaces, and the fucking owner of the app is a descendant of fucking people who had diamond mines during apartheid, a whole apartheid baby, a colonizer, and he is exploiting people too. So, and he also is a settler. So the thing is, it's like it's coming from that medium that these images are constantly like put in our faces, and it's always showing black people as subservient, doing for white people, dancing for crackers. It's entertaining Ofays or saving Ofays. It's some kind of servitude, and even that is part of the dehumanization process because it's like beast of burden. You know what I'm trying to say? I'll keep reading. Experimenting with different forms of visualization, Smith shoots some of his video through the scope mounted on his rifle. The reticle pans back and forth across the yard, putting viewers in the position of sharpshooter. Oh, I'm sorry, I already read that part. And also, too, that part, there's a book called Fahrenheit 451, in which they describe, like, they have this interactive TV show in which people will watch it, basically a reality show. And they were watching as they were going after Montag. And as the police in the state had all these helicopters and drones chasing Montag, they had videos live streaming from the point of view of like the helicopter and the sharpshooter and the police from their body cams, so that people were taking part in hunting down a fugitive of the state. Wild. But I thought of that scene from that book as they were describing this, as they're describing the role that photographers took and the media took place in this massacre and this repression of revolt. When asked why he was showing the footage to cadets at the police academy, John C. Miller, former chief inspector of the New York State Police, admitted that it was not being used to derive lessons from the assault. He testified that you view something to possibly learn something, but sometimes it's something that you see that you have done, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to improve things or it's going to be changed. This suggests that there was no tactical or strategic reason to show these videos to incoming cadets, and that perhaps the footage was screened simply so that they could see what they had done, to appreciate it from an aesthetic point of view. It was to train the cadets, that is, to help them develop habits and thoughts and or behaviors in forms of engagement that didn't necessarily have to be improved or changed. Hence the role of media in a whole when they have constant anti-Black images, and how we're all indoctrinated into seeing Black people as not people, as unhuman, therefore justifying the state and its repressive nature because they have to keep these beasts ruling and in line and in their place. And so the ultimate act of resistance is to define our own humanity. And again, the ritual of revolt gives us the power to do so, because we are now overthrowing the state which represses us, which keeps us from being who we seek to be, which is free. This suggests that there was no tactical or strategic reason to show these videos to incoming cadets. But what of the massacre's unseen, redacted, and deleted visual archive? We can confidently speculate. As several scholars have noted, photographs are central to the ritual of lynching, and their primary function is not to further terrorize the victims. Rather, through lynching photos, white subjects construct their collective identity and group solidarity upon the substrate of Black subjection. As keepsakes, lynching photographs become an instrument for manipulating time and enabling predators to prolong the ecstatic, fleeting moment of total power lynching ritual allows. And what does that sound like? When George Zimmerman killed Trayvon Martin, that motherfucker went on a tour. People were buying Skittles and having him sign it. Again, like collecting toes and other appendages from lynched and charred and distorted bodies back in the day. Same ritual. The white identity rests on Black subjugation is basically what we're saying, and we're describing, and what this system does and why it does it. As keepsakes, lynching photographs, I keep doing it, I'm sorry, y'all. Through photography, that's my place. David Marriott explains, an image of white identity emerges from a spectacle of annihilation, the lynchers posing grimly alongside their Black quote-unquote trophies, a moment frozen in time, flashlit in the heat of subsided passion. Having performed their human sacrifice in the most excessive way possible, the mob stages photographic encounters in which they look at the camera, not with expressions of horror, but with continents of calm satisfaction, whiteness reborn again and again. Later, amid the prosaic flow of daily life, participants in the lynch mob can return to that extraordinary moment through the photograph. They show the images to their families and friends who see them standing next to a thing that is clearly not alive, not human, and against this negative, a narrative of their own vitality, dominance, and belongingness, to the community of man is drawn in sharp relief. It is entirely predictable that this is what the unseen Attica photos contained. And if more evidence is required, perhaps that which has not been culled from the putatively bygone era, we need to look no further than the U.S. torture camp Abu Ghraib. Not only did the cache of images obtained by the press in 2004 reveal that Muslim men constructed as terrorists had quote unquote, I'm sorry, I'm going to read that again because I messed it up. Not only did the cache of images obtained by the press in 2004 reveal that Muslim men constructed as terrorists and enemy combatants were being subjected to the violence of sexual racism, but also that the U.S. soldiers and prison guards, both male and female, took pleasure in being photographed while inhabiting postures of dominance over these men. The visualization of this violence reproduces the myth of white man as the rightful master of the world, covertly undergirding white patriarchy, the modern state form, and U.S. empire. During our conversation, Bugs shared a recollection that is also a theorization of the entanglements between violence and visuality, punishment and pleasure, anti-black terror and white sexuality. While standing in the coffle, he explained, the guards were celebrating, talking about, did you get a nigger? Yeah, I got 5. And they were slapping 5s. They was even talking or taking home movies with us as they paraded us around. They got all kinds of catcalls about the genitalia. Hey, nigger, pick your third leg up. All that kind of shit. I guess they showed them at home for their wives. They have their cocktail parties and they pull out the home movies of the Attica massacre, and it was a big sport for them. Hate them bastards. That's the end of the quote from Bugs. As I was reading that, what comes to mind is shit, I lost it. Because I was thinking about Abu Ghraib, but I was thinking about New Orleans. I was thinking about New Orleans when Katrina hit in 2005 and how them crackers started hunting black people down. Like here they're, and that's the thing. The way the drainage system is set up, and especially in majority black areas, people need to study. So wherever you find yourself, you should study the drainage system and how it's set up, because a lot of the cities are set up in a way or sequester black people in a place where it has poor drainage. So oftentimes the runoff from the suburbs or white areas goes off into black neighborhoods and floods those first. And so you're talking about these people were after a hurricane, I think it was a category 5 or 4. They decided, police, sheriffs, everyday crackers who worked at Applebee's and crackers who worked at the gas station literally picked up guns, knives, and started hunting and killing black people left and right and raping black people. It was some sick shit. And so can you imagine, here you are post-hurricane, flooded, trying to find food, water, shelter, anything. And then you also have to worry about these crackers fucking living out their fucking purge fantasies and shit. And that this is glossed over, not even talked about, and act like it didn't happen. And so as people in this fucked up white settler colony, live under constant terror and terrorization, man. And terrorism is fucking sick. But that's what it made me think of. Let me continue. The reconquest of Attica was a parade, a sport, a contest to see who among the mob could most completely liberate, dominate, and possess the black male form. The lens, like the gun and the nigger stick, was simultaneously an instrument of violence and a tool of sexualized play. The wielders of these weapons were not only securing the prison and producing evidence for official state functions, they were producing home movies intended for circulation and consumption within the sacred spaces of white sociality. Cocktail parties, where such novelties might stimulate jealousy among those who were not there, but wish they were, or the bedroom, where the possession of niggerized bodies and third legs, in quotes, fueled unspoken white sexual appetites. 50 years later, recalling these desires to possess and consume black flesh, Bugs articulates a deep-seated hatred that still seethes within. James Baldwin has much to say about the sexual charge of white ritual violence. He narrates his short story, Going to Meet the Man, from the perspective of Jesse, a white deputy sheriff in a small southern town who sees himself as a good man. The story opens with Jesse unable to achieve an erection while trying to have sex with his wife. Frustrated, he lies beside her in bed, plumbing the depths of his mind until he arrives at a memory of himself torturing an imprisoned black man, a civil rights ringleader, a bad nigger, by shocking the man's testicles with a cattle prod. The memory causes Jesse to hurt all over with that particular excitement, which refused to be released. He then probes deeper into his subconscious, recalling how he was ushered into white manhood under the tutelage of his father and his father's friends, who had been responsible for law and order much longer than him. As a child, sitting on his father's his father's soldiers, I cannot pronounce that word, soldiers amid a sea of white faces, he witnessed his first lynching. He saw a black man being burned alive and castrated, and he watched that sea of white faces, including that of his mother, also watching it and being titillated. He watched a hanging, gleaming body, the most beautiful and terrible object he had ever seen till then. He remembers how they severed the object's large black penis, and the memory causes Jesse's nature to return to him again. Fully aroused, Jesse embraces his wife and tells her to love me just like you'd love a nigger. They engage in passionate sex. Similarly, in If Beale Street Could Talk, a novel that revolves around the Manhattan House of Detention, but which is believed to be loosely based on Attica. A male character who was recently released from prison tells his friend that not only was he raped, but that guards derived sexual gratification from his suffering. I don't believe there's a white man in this country, baby, who can get his dick hard without he hears some nigger moan, Baldwin writes. Through fiction, Baldwin theorizes how white identity, intimacy, desire, and sexuality are constituted through black suffering. Again, as we read about what our people are being put through, it it blows my mind at the amount of violence that we're subjected to make sure that we don't revolt. So to me, like the solution is obvious. The only way forward is revolution. I'll keep reading because it's almost 3 o'clock and I want to get through this chapter. The insidiousness of the McKay Commission report, which its cover image of denuded and niggerized males, is that it masks while surreptitiously perpetuating violence against the Attica survivors. However, it does not do so alone. The report was nominated for a National Book Award in 1972 and received near universal praise for its thoroughness, even-handedness, and courage in criticizing the excessive of the state. Its pages are filled with salacious descriptions of the homosexual behaviors of the captive men, consensual sex as well as rape. However, nowhere does it analyze the profoundly sexualized techniques of carceral management or the various sexual predations enacted upon Attica captives to restore normative order. And yet, the coffle image on the cover of the book visually writes the captive status as chattel, presenting their vulnerability to sexual violence as a banal social fact. Fucking sick. Among Murad available images, the marketing team at Bantam Books choose to adorn the cover with this grotesque image of sexualized black subjection. And real quick, as y'all are hearing this, doesn't it that make sense, like these public displays of black objectification that they do? Like there was a viral image, I think, out of Sweden in which some rich au face decided to have a cake of a naked black woman, and it was like done in a very minstrel way, this cake. And then as they cut the cake, it's red velvet, so it is to like be a symbolic of an actual black body cutting up into flesh and consuming black flesh. And people are like, "Oh, this is sick. Do they do this all the time?" Well, when we see how media is engaged in consuming Black pain, Black trauma, how that's served to us as a form of entertainment, how they'll kill a Trayvon Martin and then make a Netflix about it, how they'll imprison us in these concentration camps and then make a movie like or a show like Oz and have us consume it, something that dehumanizes them and paints us captives as just brutes that are just engaged in just raping each other, how they'll have a predator like the character that like from this show, The Boondocks. I forgot his name, but basically, it's a character. It's a joke. Here's a symbol of a rapist that rapes Black men within prison, within a sexually violent carceral state, and the image of that is this joke that is then turned into a cartoon, and how all of this, yo, y'all got it. It's just sorry, I'm just thinking out loud because this shit just pisses me the fuck off. But let me keep reading. But ain't this shit sick? So fucking sick. So then my point is that public or that trending topic of that Swedish au fait with the cake is not out the ordinary. That is a common way of like again participating in white settler colonialism and participating in white supremacy. It's just like how they have festivals of Black Pete and shit, and they try to they're like, oh no, it's a tradition that has nothing to do with racism. No, it absolutely does. Like anti-Blackness is the foundation of all oppressive structures, which is why all this shit gotta go. Let's see. More so, or moreover, until now, no one seems to have thought this atrocity was worthy of remark, as I have been unable to find any evidence that any critics discussed the use of this image on the cover. What I did find was an article in the September 17, 1972 edition of the New York Times announcing the release of the report. It prominently features a version of the same photograph, but with a significant modification. The men's penises have been removed. As I have already shown, the beautiful operation, in quotes, entail orgasmic rituals of sexual domination during which anxieties about Black male genitalia and discourse of castration loomed large. The New York Times never printed a formal retraction of their false claim that the rebels had castrated a hostage, nor did the newspaper of record renounce the white supremacist theory of ontology that authorized the claim in the first place. The notion that white man enjoys a natural and exclusive entitlement to masculine humanity is not so clearly stated in their write-up of the McKay Commission report a year later, but it is embedded within the discourse of the article's accompanying image. The staff of the Times found this image so irresistible that they circumvented publication standards prohibiting the display of frontal nudity by pictorially castrating at least 3 Black men located in the bottom right-hand corner of the frame. The denuded profiles of these men are clearly visible, but in the space where their penises are noticeable in other versions of the image, only a void remains. One can only speculate about whether Attica rebel Jomo Omowale was aware of this alteration when he wrote in 1973, "We must not accept any more media-made castrated leaders who quietly retreat when it's time to stand." Ashe. Accompanied by the y'all, evocative headline. Please let that be right. Accompanied by the evocative headline, "Anatomy of a Prison Riot," the image provided the paper's global readership with a sexualized visualization of racial mastery, while at the same time providing the comforting assurance that the phantasmic Black dick was not there, and moreover, that it was rightfully possessed by a higher authority. This absence was also a presence, one that visually communicated the simultaneous military defeat and sexual disarmament of Black male insurgents. It displayed the availability of Black flesh as an ungendered terrain of libido experimentation. It bears stating, although I hope this point is obvious, that my symptomatic reading of this image is not an endorsement of the underlying logic of its deployment. a logic that imputes unique agency to cisgendered men with penises. Rather, I am explicating the intensely patriarchal logic of white supremacy, in which there can be no masculinity except for that which belongs to white men. This is the same white supremacist logic that relentlessly assails Black revolutionary possibility, however imperfect and shackled by patriarchy it might be. There is a book that I put as a post for free PDF link, and it's called Sissy Insurgency. Um, Damn, I forgot the subtitle, but it's called Sissy Insurgency. So I encourage all y'all to read that because it touches on this and how manhood, quote unquote, is weaponized under white patriarchy and what that looks like. And how the limiting of manhood, stifling it, making it a binary, that it can only look this way, that it can only look white approved, that it can only be a status quo, instead of something that's expansive that you can explore over time and space, right? It limits it for a reason, because in limiting that, they're able to basically dehumanize you, and that's part of the dehumanization process. So, anyways, I encourage people to read that book, Sissy Insurgencies, and if you type it in, it'll come right up. This is the same white supremacist. The central finding of the report, according to the article, was that, in contrast to claims made by the state actors as Nelson Rockefeller and Russell G. Oswald, the rebellion was reformist rather than revolutionary in its orientation. This shows that it was the elite liberal media, not the right-wing lynch mob, that realized the fantasies of the rebellion's most ardent antagonist. Through Anatomy of a Prison Riot, the newspaper simultaneously negated Black revolutionary politics and liberated the Black penis. The next section is called Petition for Certificates Extraordinary. Let me grab some water. I have a visceral memory of my first encounter with Petition for Certificates Extraordinary. I was seated at a microfilm machine in the New York State Archives in Albany, browsing through copies of Attica-related correspondence received by Rockefeller's office in 1972. I was hoping to gain insight into what imprisoned people and their families were writing during the massacre's immediate aftermath to the man who authorized it. The first thing I noticed about the document was its remarkable visuality. Before attempting to decipher its meaning, I appraised its form, its emotive force, its textual density, the fierce intentionality of its organization and its inscription. As anthropologist Tim Ingold explains in the lines in all caps, the letters of each word, the words of each sentence, and the sentences of each paragraph threaten to suffocate each other, and yet, mirroring the conditions under which they were produced, each character exists in its own tightly controlled space. Each line proceeds across the page with geometric precision, stopping just shy of the edge, only to proceed anew on the next row, like a tier of prison cells. As a purely aesthetic form, Petition for Certificates Extraordinary conveys a terrifying discipline and a barely contained rage. I find myself imagining that were I able to hold the original document, I would be able to feel the deep impressions the author's pen must have left on the page. The petition's author, Caspar Baker Gary, was born in Hamlet, North Carolina in 1938. He was an artist, an athlete, a leader among his peers, and always a brilliant kid. His younger brother told me. In the late 1950s, after an undesirable discharge from the U.S. Army, Caspar moved to New York City. Shortly thereafter, he was arrested for stealing less than $100, resulting in a conviction for first-degree robbery and a stiff sentence of 10 years in prison. His time behind the walls was laden with antagonism. Between 1959 and 1969, Caspar was shuttled between New York's toughest prisons, accumulating dozens of disciplinary infractions on his record. Does not operate his loom or produce as he should, in quotes. Complaint by Redacted that Gary has become insistent that he become intimate with him. In another report, writing a sarcastic and threatening note to PK, principal keeper, claiming that he was being treated in an inhumane, uncivilized, barbaric manner. Another report, sending a warning note to warden, passing notes out windows from HBZ, Attica's solitary confinement unit to yard. And on another report, each of these infractions, I'm sorry, that's the end of it. Each of these infractions was met with punishment, loss of privileges, deferral of parole hearings, solitary confinement, and of course, those unofficial penalties and brutalities that, as a matter of course, are not recorded. These experiences radicalized Casper, who was released from prison in October of 1969, only to be reincarcerated 1 month later for a parole violation. As his given name suggests, Casper was very much a spectral figure, a being that defies classification. But one thing is certain, he was mad. Sorry, I had to take a breath because I'm just like, the way in which the violence of the state make you normalize this shit, like this shit is how it's supposed to be, that when we see other people suffering, when we see other people being repressed, we can empathize with them. But I often don't see people link the parallels. Like, we can see what's going on in Gaza, and we know what's going on in Palestine is a resistance for liberation against the white settler colonial project. But I think we fall short when we corner it off to just, oh, that's just what Israel's doing, and America has no choice but to just stand by and watch. That's not it. Israel is a part of a larger colonial project, is a part of the total white settler colonial project, which is global. So therefore, the reason why we see commonalities in which the Palestinians are being treated in the concentration camps there, and the way people held captive by the state are being treated in concentration camps here, is because we're being repressed by the imperialist project of white hegemony. Therefore, our resistance is a global one. As his given name suggests, Casper was very much a spectral figure, as being that defies classification. But one thing is certain, he was mad. Following, I hope I say this name right, Thierry Alice Pinkin's useful description of critical disability studies, I embrace the capacity of madness to convey a lexical range that includes insanity, cognitive disability, anger, and excess. Indeed, Casper's madness cannot be disentangled from the term's various registers, nor can it be wholly attributed to or divested from his extensive biography of captivity and repression. When the tombs erupted in rebellion, he was in the Dannemora State Hospital for the criminally insane, where he was subjected to electrical shock treatment, in quotes. The deputy director of that institution accused Casper and his prisoners' liberation front of subversion, of intentionally infiltrating the institution for the purpose of disruption. They, the PLF, were obviously not psychotic, but only faking, he explained in a staff meeting. Evidence suggests that Casper was in the protracted Auburn Rebellion at some point between November 1970 and May of 1971, but when Attica erupted, he was in Clinton, where given his antagonism with the administration, he was likely targeted by the sexualized anti-radical raids. It's funny reading that because I was talking with someone and basically we were talking about the ways in which to commit class suicide and how sabotage and direct action look like for people who occupy certain positions in a class society. So like if you're someone who works on a pipeline and you know what shutting that pipeline can do as far as being a blow to the economic side of empire, you shut it down because you know how to. Like that is one of the ways in which you subvert, or like you get other people who are like-minded into a job so that they can do little bouts of sabotage. Those things happening collectively all over, it happens. Again, you can't go and post about it like, hey, today I did this. But that is what's happening like all across the global south and in certain places within the belly of the beast. I just thought that was interesting that, reading that part about how in the report, it said that they don't think that they were actually this, they put it insane, that they went in there on purpose for the express purpose of taking it over. Interesting. And it would be interesting if that's how we moved. Like I'm going to get this job for the express reason, purpose, to be strategic, because I need to hold this post for any kind of direct action or sabotage or help. But anyways, let me keep going. Over the preceding 14 months, Casper had been conducting his own investigation, during which he claims to have interviewed more than 500 people, guards and captives alike. Through this process, he claims to have developed a picture of the actual behavior of the several and various state officers and agents who partook in the violence. We can only speculate about whether Casper truly believed that Douglas, a member of Rockefeller's inner circle, would entertain his peculiar request to effectively deputize the PLF, and about what constituted proper legal sanction in his eyes. But Casper clearly took the petition seriously and wanted it to be taken seriously by others. It is correctly formatted as a legal writ, signed by Casper, and even notarized. Its language is extremely formal. It is laden with long, complex sentences and exacting word choices and bewildering verb tenses, but features few spelling or grammatical errors. To engage, petition for certificates extraordinary, it is to wade into an unruly, evasive, and eclectic form of mad science. Its mode of study, explanation, and narration defies established notions of time and politics and genres of written communication, begging to be interpreted in a myriad of ways. Unquestionably, though, the document forces its reader to contend with the violent sexual perversity that saturated the Attica massacre. In ways unlike any other document I have ever encountered, it exposes the world shattering rituals of ontological warfare that were imposed upon the rebels. Although the petition is a trenchant critique of violence, my decision to excerpt and analyze it will inevitably be experienced by many readers as a violence of its own. This is a contradiction with which I have grappled, ultimately deciding to reproduce the petition, not as an attempt to invoke sympathy or even outrage, but to demonstrate the enormity of sexual violence at Attica and the workings of liberal authorized accounts in sanitizing that violence. The sanitation has facilitated our generalized failure to understand the actual existing dynamics of the prison as war, encumbering the developing of abolitionist ethics and politics. Casper conveys the primary findings of his research, a catalog of despicable and savage atrocities, in language that demands to be quoted at length. To Douglas, he writes, I am now able to confidently allege that during said 13 through 20 September 1971 period at Attica, some of the prisoners, more than 100, were from time to time taken from groups, cell blocks, and companies, and conducted by a group of 3 or more state policemen and or prison guards, BCI Bureau of Criminal Investigation, sheriff deputies, etc., to one of the many isolated cells, rooms, yards, shops, corridors, basements, attics, rooftops, and other isolated places, and then and there each of the said prisoners, depending entirely upon the particular taste and character of their haphazard tormentors, were forced at gunpoint to submit to at least one, but not infrequently each prisoner was compelled to endure all of the following despicable and savage atrocities. 1. To be forcibly raped by each of the several officers. And a quick note, so in Orisanmi's book, he puts a scan of the certificates of extraordinary that was written by Casper Breaker that we're reading from now. So if you go to the post that had this space, I put them in the replies so that you can go back and read them. And also too, of course, you can go to the linked book in the library or the post itself. So I'm just skipping through that so that y'all can go and read it. But it basically names all the sexual violence that they went through. And I think it's about 4 pages. So I'm continuing the list. So we just read 1. Number 2, to perform fellatio on each of the several officers. 3, to kneel with his mouth open as each officer took his turn urinating in his face and or mouth. 4, to hold his mouth open as much as each officer took his turn, expectorating into his face and or mouth all such mucus and or mucus fluids, such secretions as could be drawn into their mouths from each lung and nasal cavity. To eat of the stool of each of the several officers after each officer had taken his turn upon the toilet, floor, ground, etc. To hold still while each officer applied a lighted cigarette and or match or cigarette lighter to his penis, testicles, rectum, and other vital parts of his body, and to any and all other foul and despicable savageries as chanced to strike the fancy of any one of the several officers. Yeah, that's always tough to read, but necessary for us to know. The things in which they put people through behind enemy lines, aka prisons, every fucking day. And the fact that we have children locked up in these concentration camps going through this. Through thick description and zealous rhetorical precision, Gasper's research charges a small detachment of state actors with systemically gang raping starved and injured men. This devastating accusation viscerally shifts the focus of our interrogation away from the excessive, quote unquote, yet generally permissible inflictions of violence that have shaped dominant understandings of the Attica Massacre. And when we read what was done during the Attica Massacre, doesn't it sound like what happens in warfare across the global south by the imperialist state of America and other imperialist countries, Western imperialist countries? Like, so it should leave no doubt what we're going through here and why many of revolutionaries and radical people and historians and theorists alike has charged genocide, that we are being genocide. We are genocide people. We are in genocide. I'm so pissed off right now. The devastating accusation. Oh, I'm sorry, you read that. In their stead, we are confronted with a class of sexualized atrocity that has not and cannot be fully incorporated into the public discourse because doing so would rupture the myth of white men and white civilization. Casper forgoes rehashing the generic forms of killing and beating that had already received considerable attention in the official reports and the media, perhaps because the fact is that such killings, woundings, and thrashings, even when applied to a degree believed to be beyond what is quote unquote necessary, are authorized and normalized as something that people generally, and the state in particular, can legitimately do to people generally and revolting Black people especially. As I have already shown, bodily waste was weaponized by both sides of the struggle. Caged rebels in Auburn resisted state terror by hurling their urine and feces at their armed attackers. However, this defensive practice is inconsumable with what the petition describes, the ritualized excretion of utterly powerless human beings under the threat of death, isolated and held at gunpoint. They were forced to kneel, a position of worship and supplication, and to open their mouths, awaiting receipt of their enemies' rancid bodily discharge. These acts of violent white masculinity could have been plucked from the pages of 100 Days of Sodom, or from Pierre Postelini's description of fascism in the film Solo. They have precedent in the real-life arsenal of Thomas Thistlewood, the 18th century plantation overseer who devised a punishment he called Derby's dose, in which an enslaved person was forced to defecate into the mouth of another, after which the mouth would be sealed shut. Unlike the beatings and killings that made headlines, these atrocities of sexual revenge cannot be written off as the mere excess of an otherwise rational system. Rather, the production of excess was clearly the object of these defilements insofar as they fixated on reproductive organs, bodily orifices, and the digestive system, the very parts of human anatomy that produce excess, phlegm, urine, feces, semen. To be forcibly raped, to perform, to kneel, to hold, to eat. Casper describes acts alleged to have happened in the past, but does so using infinitive, infinitive tenses and subjective grammatical moods, placing these acts in a space time of rumor, doubt, speculation, and possibility, a space time in which they could happen, did happen, are happening, and will happen again and again. I have neither the capacity nor the interest to verify Casper's claim according to positive standards of truth. What matters most is that prisons are engines of anti human violence. While it describes particular and exceptional expressions of this condition, Capser's research draws our attention to how a racial sexual logic of thingification undergirds prisons under normal conditions. The patriarchal organization of authority, the institutionalized segregation of the sexes, the regulation of intimacy, the separation from families, the divestment of rights, the condoning of rape, the facilitation of racism, the strip searches, the rectal examinations, the nigger sticks, the vulnerability to violence, the Attica massacre was the logical accumulation of the prison's mundane rituals. The Long Attica Revolt was energized by collective efforts to articulate, enact, and realize modes of being that transcended a liberal humanism that presents itself as universal while hinging on the dehumanization of others. After elaborating the inconceivable violence of the massacre, Casper engaged and extends this conversation. The petition's final section theorizes an alternative ontological scheme in which race, as the hierarchical ordering of humanoid species, is rendered obsolete via the recognition of a true human universality. For Casper, Attica was symptomatic of the generalized failure among those masquerading as humans, warmongers, predators, and parasites to comprehend that at a spiritual and molecular level, they are essentially indivisible from those they hunt. To Douglas, who was white, and as far as I know, a complete stranger, Casper expounds that finally I come to you because you are my brother and protector in the family, as well as one of the keepers of the deeds. And the fundamental and unshakable love that binds us together is older than the first mountain, predating by a billion generations the ordinary assignability of fibrous differentiation, sorry, differentiation and scaled pigmentation, so that you and I are just as assertedly of the mother and father as they are of the same and identical ocean of life, that majestic collection of submicroscopic people whose eternal chance and duty it is to become human beings. And so long as you and I were in that boundless submicroscopic universe, we shared with one another, assisted and protected one another. For there could be no doubt that we were brothers, flesh of the same flesh, blood of the same blood, and bone of the same bone. The mere addition of various particles and the inception of increased quantities of light rays inherent in the metamorphosis from autochronosis, and I was doing so well, sea brothers to fellow men, has no effect whatsoever upon the might womb from which we have in common sprung. Casper offers a new formulation of human being through a novel architecture of knowledge that blends Western scientific axioms, Abrahamic religiosity, and deep mysticism. The prism of mad science stretches his temporal frame of reference far beyond recorded history and the geographical coordinates to the scale of the galaxy, inviting us to ponder human being as a totality of space, matter, motion, and light. He urges us to begin at the beginning, a billion generations ago, before culture, civilization, and race. He asks us to ponder how it came to be that beings produced by an unshakable love that emerged from a single womb, that are constituted by identical submicroscopic particles, and that only recently metamorphized into their present form, in which only minor differences of scaled pigmentation register in the visual field. proceed to cage, kill, defile, terrorize one another. His invocation of the human as not yet fully incarnate, as deferred potentiality with the chance and duty to one day realize its full capacity, evokes the new humanism of anti colonial theorists like Frantz Fanon and Sylvia Wynter. For Casper, the tragedy of the human is that it continually proves itself unable to recognize the truly universal qualities that it reflects and embodies. The fact that I found this petition in the New York State Archives indicates that someone on the governor's staff received and opened the letter, but we can only speculate as to how and why Casper's cry for help, this primal scream, was preserved while simultaneously ignored. Perhaps the functionary who opened it never really looked at it, simply filed it away with the multitude of letters received from the caged and dispossessed. Perhaps they read it but found it so shocking and unbelievable that they ignored it. Or maybe they tried to read it but found it illegible, not visually, for Casper made sure that his words were clear, but were not only clear, but conceptually. This is to say, maybe they saw that Casper was mad and therefore that his claims had little value. Alternatively, they could have read the petition and believed Casper's claims, but felt that no action was warranted because this is what happens or should be happening to quote unquote those people. Did Douglass ever see the petition? Did Rockefeller himself? The unanswered and unanswerable questions are legion and will remain so. In the symbolic universe of white man, Attica was much more than a prison rebellion. It was what Baldwin called a upheaval in the universe. In response to state actors, white civil society, and mass media coalesced into a frenzied mob that inflicted world-shattering violence upon the bodies and minds, the very being of the rebels. These rituals of sexual revenge and soul murder consciously and unconsciously drew from putatively bygone eras of colonial and chattel dominance. Exactly. Irreducible to tactics, strategy, and political rationality, these rituals conjured a figurative world in which Black beings exist only as objects of white enjoyment and self actualization. Though officially aimed at restoring order, in quotes, within a riotous rural prison in Western New York, these acts of sexual revenge aim to stabilize a deeper order, the gendered racial order that upholds capital, nation, empire, and civilization, the racial taxonomy through which the white man is formed and without which he vanishes into oblivion. During a recorded phone conversation, President Nixon told Rockefeller that he thought the massacre was going to have a hell of salutary effect on future prison riots. The opposite was true. The rebellion and massacre unleashed new expressions of anti-carceral militancy. The Weather Underground detonated a bomb at the Albany headquarters of the New York prison system. Captives in a prison jail in Baltimore and a federal women's prison in West Virginia rebelled in solidarity with Attica. More prison rebellions occurred in 1972 than in any other year on record. On January 27, 1972, the George Jackson Squad of the BLA, Black Liberation Army, carried out a gruesome assassination of the NYPD officers Gregory Foster and Rocco Laurie. According to the official story, at around 10:30 p.m., as the pair patrolled the East Village, they were ambushed by three Black men who shot them in the back. Foster, who was Black, was subsequently shot through his eyes. Laurie, who was white, was shot twice in the groin, one bullet striking his penis. The NYPD's chief protagonist called it a crime of such savagery that it was almost incomprehensible. Yet, those responsible for those cruel acts contextualize them as retaliation for the Attica massacre and pervasive anti-Black sexual violence. No longer will Black people tolerate Attica and oppression and exploitation and rape of our Black community. This is the start of our spring offensive. There is more to come. Reiterating the source of their animus, they signed off, "We remember Attica." The failure of state violence to quell the revolt sets the stage for my discussion in the following chapter. There, I revealed that the Attica massacre was only the most visible form of repression within a protracted campaign of prison pacification. In the shadow of their spectacular atrocity, the administrators of carceral war implemented a constellation of seductive reforms that promoted the idea that the state was fulfilling the rebels' quote unquote reasonable demands out of a new sense of enlightened benevolence, while in reality, they were legitimizing their rule and enhancing their control through a conscious strategy of counterinsurgency. This reformist counterinsurgency reshaped prisons as we know them and laid the groundwork for the United States to become a world leader of incarceration. That's the end of chapter 4. And the next one is chapter 5, Hidden War, 4 Strategies of Reformist Counterinsurgency. And that is such a dope chapter. I'm not going to give it away. Just know I'm going to talk my shit throughout it. I hope as we go through this book, people are able to draw parallels not only to the past war crimes of this fucking global white hegemony, but also of current atrocities that are taking place, not only in places of struggle, but just in our everyday lives. Like the fact that, they talk about how they would bust in the cells and violate them is the same way they can bust in our doors and kill us in our sleep and do so. And then what ends up happening is as the state and their state actors kill and terrorize us in our communities, they make spectacle out of it. And that spectacle is supposed to demoralize resistance, supposed to say, look how violent we can get. Do you think you can get as violent as us? And the deal is, like I keep saying over and over, we are also reminded of the resistance, right? Of the global resistance that has taken place ever since the inception of this fucking terrorist state. And that should remind us that not only is revolution possible, but that in the process of revolt gives us the power to define humanity for ourselves, but also gives us the power to make whole new worlds. So I want to leave y'all with that. And I hope that, I know I'll be stuttering and mispronouncing a lot. So I hope that y'all read the book. I also want to tell y'all that as we're reading this book, I'm also doing some hustling on the side to buy and purchase this book to send to our comrades who are locked up. So Qasem Jarreau is getting a copy, and as well as 50 other held captives are getting a copy of this book and are starting cadres within their respective prisons and place of captivity to also, so other people can have access to this work. So that's what we're doing here together. So again, thank y'all for coming and listening. I hope many more get access to this and the book. Remember, there's a free PDF. And above all, let's remember, y'all, revolution in our lifetime. Let's get free.